Here we go. Heather's here, ready to go. So we're gonna.
Katie, it won't work on it.
We'll call this meeting to order. Monday, December 9th, meeting of the Oregon School Board, Board of Education meeting. I am filling in tonight for President Flanagan. Katie, would you please call the roll?
Ms. Vizak?
Here.
Dr. Bush?
Here.
Ms. Garrison?
Yes.
Dr. Lakuta?
Yes.
Mr. Pankratz?
Here.
Ms. Wright?
Here.
Ms. Flanagan?
All right, thank you, Katie. Let's see here. We have the agenda in front of us tonight. So tonight we have a consent calendar, information items. We have one action item, which is the approval of our 23-24 financial audit. And then regular discussion items and our regular informational items, including discussion of our DPI report card update. And then also a 90-day goal cycle report from our teaching and learning staff. And then we do have an executive session tonight, 2 items discussing potential retention benefits for staff pursuant to Wisconsin statutes and consideration of performance evaluation regarding district administrator. So with that, I will take a motion to approve the agenda. All right, motion by Leslie, second by Heather. Katie, could you please call the roll?
Ms. Wright?
Yes.
Ms. Garrison?
Yes.
Ms. Vizak?
Yes.
Dr. Bush?
Yes.
Dr. Lakuta?
Yes.
Mr. Pankratz?
Yes. Motion carries 7-0. Thank you. We have an agenda.
6.
6-0. Thank you. Can't do math. Moves us to our consent calendar. So you have the consent calendar in front of you. I'll take a motion to approve.
I'll make that motion.
Motion by Mary. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second by Leslie. Is there any discussion? All right, no discussion. Before we vote, I would like to read our very generous donations, and it is a very long list this month. We have a donation of $300 from the Rotary International for 8th grade learner park activity. A motion of $25 from Chetine and Christopher Krieger for the band activity account. And then we have a whole series of donations here for the 8th grade leaf raking community service event. $40 from Mary and Mike Gratz, $50 from Arnold and Carol Volmer, $20 from Linda Sutherland, $50 from Kim Zolke, $100 from Tanner Nystrom and Allison Dierich, $250 from Nancy Ciambrone, $50 from Ann and Andrew Weiland, $100 from Mark Gross, $20 from Donna Weber Harms, $40 from Linda Reinhardt, $40 from Steve Johnson, and then we have $30 from Andrea Anderson, and then we have a $389.97 donation towards the purchase of FES FIED pickleball equipment. That comes to us from the FES PTO. We have, and then we have a whole series here for donations for the splash pad, $100 from Andrea Anderson, or I'm sorry, from Mary McFarlane, $25 from Susan Haberman, $100 from Amanda Stulke, $25 from Nellie McDaniel, $50 from Miss Melissa Slattery, $100 from Patrick Kelly, $100 from David Gazner, and then also a $2,000 anonymous donation for the splash pad. We have a $75 donation from Ronald and Linda Graber for the 8th grade Leafing Community Service event. We have a $4,000 donation for miscellaneous classroom needs from the Abbott Charitable Foundation. $1,500 donation from the Oregon Brooklyn Lions Club for the scholarship of the same name. $892.29 donation from the Oregon Area Foundation FOSD for a Cool Grant for OMS microscopes. $609.93 for students accessing IEPs from the Wisconsin State Council Knights of Columbus. $464.60 from the Girls Swim State Coach Bus. That was from the Oregon Athletic Boosters. Also from Oregon Athletic Boosters, $950.35 for soccer pop-up goals. Again, Oregon Athletic Boosters with a donation of $3,078 for the boys hockey team bags. And from the Oregon Athletic Boosters again, $10,150 for the wrestling scoreboard system. From Bob and Letha Schenkenberg, $100 donation for the pool. And from Amy Verheyden, $1,000 for students in need of assistance at the high school. So excellent list of donations this week. We are so very thankful for our community for these generous donations. Let's see, so we have the consent calendar motion and second on the table. We can call the roll. Katie?
Dr. Lakuta?
Yes.
Ms. Wright?
Yes.
Ms. Bijak?
Yes.
Dr. Bush?
Yes.
Ms. Garrison?
Yes.
Mr. Pankratz?
Yes, motion carries 6-0. Thank you for that. Next up, we have our informational items, and first up we have public comment, and I know we do have one person signed in for public comment. You may join us at the table, Heather. All right, I'm going to read our policy regarding public comment. So District Policy 180.05 provides an opportunity for the public to address the board. We value the public comment period and feedback from our stakeholders. To comply with the open meetings law and ensure consistency, public comment will have the following parameters. Speakers will have up to 3 minutes in which to make their comments. Ms. Katie Heitz will signal the speaker when their time is up. The board will not comment after each speaker and will reserve discussion to any items on the agenda. Speakers are very welcome to stay for the entire meeting. Next steps following public comment may include referral to the appropriate administrator for follow-up with the speaker or placement of the matter on a future board agenda. So the floor is yours. Oh, and sorry, please state your name and address before you start.
My name is Heather Young. I live at 448 Butternut Drive here in Oregon. I am a member of the Friends of the Orchestra and Band Advocates. My daughter's a freshman and plays percussion. I am here to talk about music education. Music is an integral part of our lives. We listen to it when we drive. We listen to it when we cook. We listen to it when we work. And I don't know about you, but when I cook and I listen to music, my food tastes so much better. We sing when we hear a familiar song. It uplifts us and brings us together. It is a therapy of sorts. Music has shaped cultures and societies around the world for generations. And this is why I'm here. We need to hold music education at the same kind of value that we do other well-rounded subjects. I'm not saying that math, English, and science aren't important, but what I'm saying is music education is just as important. Music for many is a way to express themselves in ways that they don't know how to otherwise. For some, it's very therapeutic. My daughter hates making speeches. If I get her up on stage singing or playing drums, she is a star. She was studying fractions last year in math, could not understand it until she put one and one together, and it's just music notes. That's all fractions are, is music notes. So she gets it now. Music isn't just being in a band or an orchestra or singing in choir. So many of our children participate in music outside of school as well. My daughter, for example, is involved in musicals, not only at our high school, but in a community theater. If she didn't love music, she wouldn't do this. I honestly think her self-esteem is better for it. My best friend, who's in her 40s, still plays in the community band. She loves it. She plays in pit orchestras when she can. She plays in Middleton Symphonic Orchestra. She loves it. I have many friends who play in pit orchestras and community theaters and who play at the Madison Symphony Orchestra. They wouldn't do it if they didn't love music, and they wouldn't do it if music education hadn't been a part of their lives. If you think that music is just a passion, let me leave you with scientific evidence that says that music has a profound impact on the minds of students outside of music programs. I can share those studies with you, and I can email it or whatever later. But in closing, that we should remember the importance of music as a part of a well-rounded education, and that we should keep small group learning as a part of music education.
Thank you. All right, do we have any other speakers here for public comment? Any other speakers for public comment? Seeing none, we can move on. Next up, we have OEA report. I see Mr. Fishweld here, but no report tonight. And next up, student report. So we have our students here. Why don't we go ahead and take it away?
Hi, I'm Addie Small.
And I'm Wesley Tanner, and we are current seniors here at OHS. There's a lot currently happening at the high school and the district as a whole, and we're excited to tell you about it.
Starting with the arts, there's a ton of stuff happening. Our choirs recently had their winter concert that was combined with the middle school. Their concert was last Thursday, and the final piece performed had 200 plus students on stage. The OHS orchestras have their winter concert this Thursday, and the band will be having theirs on the 16th. The Oregon Orchestra's seasonal players will be performing at the Oregon Manor and the Fitchburg Senior Center on the 16th as well. The Little Mermaid rehearsals began today, and the pit will start their rehearsals on the 17th. The Little Mermaid will take place on February 20th to the 23rd.
Winter sports are also up and running with a bunch of early season success. Our boys basketball team is currently 2-0, and the girls are 4-1. Our hockey team is doing well with a record of 3-2. Wrestling started their season last Friday as well. And finally, boys swimming also recently started with a 3rd place and 6th place finish in their meets so far.
Oregon High School's very own art teacher, Mr. Derrick, was recognized at the Minnesota vs. Wisconsin football game on the 19th. He was recognized as WEA Member Benefits Outstanding Educator. We want to thank Mr. Derrick for all he does for our school.
And our clubs at OHS are doing well as well. Our Model UN team was just in Chicago for an event. FBLA is starting up their competition season, and OHS is announcing the new robotics club. The robotics club will be a club for interested students to design, build, and compete with robots.
We also wanted to let you know of something that is happening on January 8th. OHS is putting together an alumni panel for grads that have gone to college, enlisted in the military, or entered the workforce right after high school. We know that some of the board members have recent OHS grads, so we are inviting them to join the panel if they're interested and have time in their busy schedules. Please let either Mr. Pliner or Mr. Ashmore know if you are interested. Thank you.
Excellent. Nice job. Thank you for that wonderful report of all of the things that are going on at our high school. All right. Next up, we move to action items, and we've got the approval of the 2023-24 financial audit report. So I'll turn that over to Dr. Bergstrom and Andy.
Thank you. Well, this is a process that we go through every year. It's a little anticlimactic because I've been talking about the numbers that are in the report for about 4 months now. But we have Jeff Osvag here from Johnson & Block, who has been our auditing company for a number of years. And Jeff's actually been one of the main auditors with us for comparable number of years. He's going to just kind of talk us through this. You may recall that in the past we haven't brought the auditors, but this is just one of those kind of best practices that if you have any questions or concerns or thoughts, that's why Jeffrey's here. He is an independent auditor, separate from myself, so that you hear it right from his mouth rather than mine.
All right, well, thank you, Andy. So as Andy mentioned, Jeff Osbach with Johnson Block & Company. this year. And so it sounds like you should all have copies of our issued final audit report, both hard or bound copies and PDF copies, it sounds like.
Yep.
Along with our required communication letters as well. So rather than going through those huge reports, I did bring this handout as well.
And I messed up and didn't hand out the handout. So I will do that right now. I thought it was a paper version.
But it looks like it's also, part of it is also on the screen here as well, so.
At least on that screen, we're having a little problem with the one in front of you.
Well, before we get into the actual financials themselves, so in the handout here, so on the back of the cover page is essentially an overview of the content of the audit report. Basically, a page through the report of what you can see. So first off is the independent auditor's report. So this is where we do provide our opinion. We did provide an unmodified opinion again this year, essentially noting that the financial statements are presented fairly in all material respects and that they are in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles. So an unmodified opinion is the highest level of assurance we can provide. So after that letter or that report is the management's discussion and analysis, or MD&A. Essentially, it's a summary of the financial statements right before you get into the actual financial statements themselves. Which in turn do come the two sets of financial statements. You have the government-wide full accrual basis statements, and then you have the fund financial statements, which is on the modified accrual basis accounting, and that has your general fund, debt service fund, capital projects fund, and then the remaining funds of the district. So that is the basis of accounting that the district uses on a day-to-day regular basis. After the financial statements come the required footnote disclosures, and then in the back of the audit reports are a few supplemental schedules, budget to actual schedules, non-major fund combining schedules, and things like that. Also within the main report is a separate section for the single audit report. So this is the federal and state separate compliance report to go in conjunction with the financial statement audit. And so one of the main deliverables of the single audit report is the schedules of expenditures of federal and state awards. So that is included within the single audit section of the report. And then along with that, another item of the single audit report is the schedule of findings and question costs. This is where we identify any non-compliance issues we came across, any deficiencies in internal controls, over compliance, and things like that. We did not have, that sounded harsh right off the bat, but we did not have any deficiencies, issues, or anything like that. That's just the schedule that I mentioned is just where that information is usually identified. But we did not have any deficiencies, non-compliance issues that we came across in our audit. To go along with the audit, we also noted a few bullet points there of just some additional reports we were required to submit. The first two bullet points there are just a couple reports that we had to submit to DPI, and then the last bullet point there in the other reports section relates to the single audit, the data collection form, which we have to submit that needs to be submitted to the federal government, basically the Federal Audit Clearinghouse. So our expectation is to get that submitted by the end of January at the latest. Then at the last section there is the second PDF that you will receive with regards to our communication letters that we are required to provide governance at the end of the audit process. And I won't necessarily get too in-depth on those, but one comment I did want to bring up was we did have an additional comment within that packet with regards to a new accounting standard that is becoming effective here for fiscal year 25. It has to do with compensated absences. So it's just more of an informative comment just to make you aware that there is this new standard coming down the pike. Basically, won't be effective here until fiscal year 25, but just to make you aware of that, basically.
just to be clear, that's, it's just a footnote that kind of goes into the audit. It's not really combined into the financial statements, correct?
Correct, yeah, so what I'm referring to here is in our separate communication letter packet, is just a comment, just noting that there is this new standard. It's not in our actual audit report itself, it's in the separate communication letter document. But with that, on page 1, we get into the actual financial statements themselves. So I won't get too into the nitty-gritty on this information here, but just to briefly summarize, so on page 1 here, the majority of this page is related to the general fund balance sheet. And so sort of going forward here, when I bring up general fund, I'm referring to Fund 10 and Fund 27, the special education fund and the general fund. So the combination of those two funds, or I should say those two funds are combined on the financial statements. So when we're going through the numbers here, this is the combination of both Fund 10 and Fund 27. So the majority of the general fund's assets you'll see are in the form of cash and taxes receivable. And then going down the line there, you have the different liabilities, accounts payable, accrued payroll liabilities, and things like that. And then the net amount is fund balance. So the 18.8 million amount is fund balance. And so in the middle of the page there, we do split fund balance out by the 4 applicable fund balance classifications. So you have non-spendable, restricted, assigned, and unassigned. And then below that, we also have a ratio where we are comparing the unassigned fund balance to, in this case, the subsequent year. So in this case, the fiscal year 25 budgeted expenditures for Fund 10 and Fund 27. And the reason we sort of show that is just to get a sense of what the general fund's reserve, unassigned reserve is, in place in case of any unexpected expenditures, decreases in funding, things like that. And the district actually has a minimum fund balance policy of 10%. So you'll see there the ratios there, fiscal year 24, 16.6 basically, 2023, 18.3. So those two ratios obviously are above the district's minimum 10% ratio.
And just to remind the board, there is a goal in our policy 611, which basically says we should have enough for cash flow purposes, which is the other reason that you have an unassigned cash fund balance, is so that you can cash flow throughout the year. And we've kind of talked about that several times.
Right. Yep. And then on the very bottom of the page there,
Sorry, can I just jump in there for the follow-up question on that? So just to clarify, Andy, we're at 16.57. This is just a point in time, right? And that number, that ratio ebbs and flows over the year as our cash flow demand, increases.
Yeah, so that's the number that we measure every year, and then we talk about. And our measurement's slightly different, I believe, than what Jeff just shared. And we're going to try to change those calculations to get them to line up. The denominator is just simply different. So we'll work on that with board policy so that we're in collaboration with the auditor. But it's as of June 30th. So that's the point in time that we're looking at. It's not something that I necessarily have a target for, because as I've shared with the board before, as we become more property wealthy compared to our other districts in the state, we will get more and more money through property taxes rather than through state aid. The impact that has is that throughout the year, state aid is kind of spread out. Property taxes are second half of the year heavy, right? Because they're not even collected yet. So, and you can almost see that actually on the top of page 1 when you look at taxes receivable. You'll see that taxes receivable almost went up $2 million. And cash receivable did go up, but not by as much as taxes receivable. So it's starting to swing more and more toward taxes. And that swing then will have a cash flow impact on us. And so that's why it's important to continue to not only maintain the unassigned fund balance percentage, but actually grow it over time. And as I shared in the packet, we did some things this year when we had additional students that we were able to actually take money out of unassigned and take money out of assigned and put it into unassigned. That's not shown here because we had to make those designations earlier in the process before we were able to do that. But as we get into this next year, we'll correct that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Continue. Oh, go ahead, Mary.
Thank you. So the percentage that's shown in here of 16.6 that you mentioned, is that in the purple as 19.84, but through a different?
Yeah, we're using a
Calculation.
different denominator.
Right, okay. And so the intent is to switch to the calculation that they use.
The preference would not to have this conversation that we're having right now. Yes.
No, understood. And the only reason I'm asking it is because their calculation gets us closer to the 10%, which is a stated minimum in a policy.
Correct.
So,
Correct.
okay, thank you.
I guess to clarify on our end too, the reason we're using subsequent years expenditures is because as of 6/30, you have a good sense of, okay, here's our budgeted expenditures based off of, as of 6/30, here's our unassigned fund balance. Now going forward, do we feel like we have a good unassigned reserve in place to help meet those potential budgeted expenditures or issues there?
And we're good with that. It actually helps from a cash flow perspective because the denominator is a little bit bigger. And so, and I think that's the other component of this that makes sense is, well, we should then use the next year's budget. From our perspective, when we came up with this policy 20 some years ago, we didn't, we kind of liked then actually knowing what that number is at that point in time but now, by this time of year in December, we do know because we've adopted the budget in October.
All right, and then on page 2, here we just list the other funds of the district, comparing, year-end 24 to year-end 23. The debt service fund balance did increase considerably between years. The main reason for that was there was a transfer from the general fund into the debt service fund for the purpose of defeasing debt here in fiscal year 25. And then also, the capital projects fund also increased considerably between years. That was due to another transfer from the general fund, and that was the city of Fitchburg TID closing disbursement, the district's portion of that. So that was originally went into the general fund and subsequently transferred to the capital projects fund. And page 3, here we have a 5-year sort of historical analysis of the general fund's expenditures. So again, this is Fund 10, Fund 27, and we are also including debt service expenditures in this graph too, since debt service is a annual expected expenditure of the district. So we're also including that here too. I won't necessarily get too in-depth or nitty-gritty on the historical side of things, but just comparing 2024 and 2023, you'll note total instruction expenditures and support service expenditures both increased. Really the main reason for that, just looking at flux analysis during the audit and things like that, the main reason would be essentially increases in wages and benefits. Knowing that there were, I think for fiscal year 24, that there was a 4.5% increase, I think, in wages. And then on top of that, obviously, benefits sort of fell in line with that as well. So, but that was really the main, from what I could tell, the main increase in those total instruction and total support service expenditures were essentially the increase in wages and benefits. And page 4, just another representation, comparing the general fund expenditures in 2024 and 2023, now just in pie chart form. And what we're doing here is we're essentially we're comparing, we're seeing what the allocation of total instruction expenditures is to total expenditures during the year. So you'll see, just as an example, but for instruction, you'll note that instruction expenditures was about 51% of expenditures compared to 50%. So there's a slight increase there. Support went up 1% as well, from 34 to 35, and then the net amount there, so then capital outlay went from 4% down to 2%. So overall, even though expenditures increased about $2.4 million between years, the overall allocation between the different classifications was actually quite comparable. So, and page 5, another trend or historical analysis now for the general fund's revenues. Really the main increase you'll see is in the local revenues, so the blue line there between 2023 and 2024. Couple reasons for that. One being the TID distribution that I mentioned, going into the general fund first, but mostly that was related to the referendum. So that was just they continued the second year, I believe, of the increased tax levy. I think that was $3 million. I believe was the tax levy increase there overall. So that was I would say those two items were the main reasons for the local increase in revenue. And then the orange line you'll also note, sort of towards the bottom of the graph, but that's the federal funding, the district's federal funds. So that decreased about 1.7, $1.8 million between years. That was mostly due to the ESSER funding. So the majority of that ESSER funding, ESSER 2, ESSER 3, those funds were mostly used in 2022 and 2023, and then it started to decrease in 24 just due to less ESSER funding being available, and then I believe that the timeline now what has already passed here in fiscal year 25.
It had to be spent by September something 2024.
Right. Yeah.
So we spent it before we got into the next fiscal year.
Yep. But otherwise, the other revenue classifications were pretty consistent between years. Page 6, another pie chart analysis now for the general fund revenues. So due to that large increase in the local revenue, you'll see that allocation or percentage of the total revenue between years did increase. So from 44% up to 51%. But again, that makes sense because the majority of the increase in revenues during the year was due to the local revenues. So that would make sense that the allocation also increased. But otherwise, the other ones were increased or decreased about 3% between years. And then lastly, one final historical chart here. And here we are comparing the district's overall general obligation debt capacity to the overall, or I guess to the outstanding general obligation debt at the end of the year. So the blue line there is the general obligation debt capacity, so that has been steadily increasing the past 5 years. And the red line is the outstanding general obligation debt at the end of each year. And so that has been steadily decreasing. And so that is just related to the annual principal payments being paid on the two debt issuances that are outstanding. So as you can see, the district is well within the overall debt capacity during those the 5 years shown. And I also want to point out in the table below, we do note the equalized value of the district. And the reason we have that there is because the general obligation debt limit in any given year is 10% of the equalized value of the district. So essentially when the equalized value of the district goes up, so does the district's debt limit. So just wanted to point that out as well. But with that being the last page of the presentation, Andy, did you have some additional? Oh, you did. Okay.
No, I
slides.
kind of was able to get all those pieces in as we were talking.
Okay.
So, if anybody has questions for Jeff, please feel free.
Yeah, so let's open it up for any clarifying questions at this point. Anna, go ahead.
I just wanted to ask a question about the comment that you made about the governmental accounting standards effective, the change, I guess, that's anticipated for next year's. I guess it's maybe a question for Andy. Is this going to, are we prepared to, I guess, report on the things that are being asked to change for next year's accounting? Or I guess, someone help me understand what this means for next year's audit, or what this means for us being prepared to have this data for the next year's report?
We actually do some calculations now a little bit on this, but basically now what we'll have to do, help me Jeff if I do this wrong, is we'll have to anticipate a percentage of, for instance, sick leave days that are going to be utilized, and then make a calculation based on that. We have done that for vacation days, and we have done that for sick leave payout purposes, but we haven't done that from an annual year-to-year basis. Is that correct?
Yes.
So we will be required to do some calculations to do that. I don't anticipate it being, the biggest thing is going to be trying to calculate the assumption of what different categories, and I'm guessing there will probably be several sessions from auditors to talk about how to do that in a fair way this spring, so that we're prepared for doing that. So it shouldn't be a huge thing. Our computer systems monitor, obviously, how many sick leave days and everything that everybody has available. It's just that coming up with the assumptions as to how many they'll be utilized.
You've seen historical trends of, okay, here's what we've seen in the past X amount of years, that, sick leave getting used during the year. So then you sort of assume based off of that possibly that, okay, this is what our liability will maybe, add on to our liability that way.
And do those actually get incorporated into either of the financial statements, the fund? I know they don't get into the DPI one, but I think they do get incorporated into the others, right?
Correct. So this standard, it's not going to affect the fund financial statements. So it's not going to affect the general fund or, your modified accrual funds. It's only going to be related to the government-wide full accrual statement.
And those are, I hesitate to characterize them how I want to characterize them, but they are definitely, we are encouraged to have two sets of books. We basically focus on the DPI set of books, the fund balance modified accrual accounting system. The only time we actually report anything related to the other set of books is when Jeff and his colleagues come in. And those sets of books are more or less for bondholders and those types of people that are trying to ascertain the actual financial condition of the district from a very high level. So for instance, they're calculating depreciation. We don't calculate depreciation for DPI's perspective, but more like a regular business. Those financial statements and the GASB rulings are requiring us to identify any different type of component to this. Our financial set of books that we're talking about here are hugely influenced, for instance, by everything that goes on with the employee trust funds in the Wisconsin retirement system. We have no impact on any of that. It's based on how well the fund does and what percentage of funding is accomplished by them. That impacts those financial statements significantly. It just kind of happens. So the first part of our audit book is really something I don't spend a tremendous amount of time at. I like to see that the numbers are going up, just because it shows that we're in a better financial system than we were last year. But I don't get overly excited about what's happening between them because we don't control that. Would that be a fair statement?
I would say so. Yeah. During the audit, like Andy said, we get the fund financial statement information from the district, and then when we are compiling the financial statements, they're called conversion entries, basically converting from the modified accrual basis of accounting to the full accrual basis of accounting. Mm-hmm. So it's just some additional journal entries, I guess you would call them, but these aren't ones we give the district, but just additional entries to convert from the fund financial statement way of reporting to the full accrual basis government-wide side of things. And on that first page, we do have a couple bullet points of just noting that they're, I guess maybe we don't, sometimes we do. Or I guess government fund financial statements identified below are converted. So Andy sort of mentioned depreciation, where on the fund financial statements that isn't recorded, but on the government-wide financial statements, the full accrual basis statements, on the balance sheet, you do show capital assets as an asset. But on the fund financial statements, that's just shown as an expenditure run through the income statement. And so there are in debt too, debt is usually just a debt expense on the fund financial statements, but then on the government-wide financial statements, that's shown as a debt obligation, as a liability on the balance sheet. So there's these, it's more, the government-wide is focused both on current and non-current type transactions and balances, where the fund financial statements, modified accrual is more focused on current, here's what your expense was for this year, and not here's the accrual for expenses maybe in future years kind of thing with compensated absences and things like that. So
GASB continues to get more and more complicated with some of these things, and actually that is driving out a lot of the auditors because it's making the auditing jobs more difficult. But they're almost trying to get governmental accounting and moving it almost to a business type of accounting system, and to some degree that creates a little bit more confusion.
Can I ask a follow-up?
Yeah.
So what's the What's the goal of having us report out our projected sick leave? What will it be used for?
So I think the concern from GASB and from bondholders who are looking for information is, are you doing something that's going to create a huge liability and put the districts in a bad situation 5, 10 years down the road? And we want to know that before we loan you money. That's the way I look at it, at least. I don't know if there's another way you'd put it, Jeff.
No, I'd say that's, like you said, the full accrual statements bondholders are definitely one of the main stakeholders, not stakeholders, but, they're the ones that really focus on those statements. And so,
Right.
I think they're just trying to get ahead of, this is a projected potential liability in the future that,
That's where the OPEB standard came out 20-some years ago. They just continue to get a little bit more picky, specific about these types of things and looking for any potential issue that could be out there. And my guess is to some degree something happens somewhere in the United States where somebody was surprised by, for instance, the thing that came out 2 years ago was these capital leases. Like all of a sudden, a school district might have a significant expenditure over time that they've committed to with a computer manufacturer or something like that, and bondholders were surprised by that, by not knowing how that all worked, and so they came up with a standard. It gets a little goofy because all of a sudden you have to present value the cost of those things and all that kind of stuff. And that's where the auditors have to rely on even other people to help them kind of come up with those calculations. So depreciation is a good thing from my perspective to some degree, because if you see the number going up, that means that you're reinvesting in your buildings and they're not 50-year-old buildings that you haven't put any money into and could. So to some degree I get some of the, but they're really getting a little nitpicky at this point in time would be my commentary on that.
No, I appreciate that. It makes sense to me that that bondholders would be interested in that. The way it was positioned, though, as governmental, I thought it was the government wanted to know. So I appreciate the clarification.
Anna, did you have a follow-up?
I was just going to say as far as the liability related to that absence, it's the cost for the substitute teachers, right? So the additional unexpected expense that we may not be building into the budget.
Correct. It's just trying to put a number on something that's fairly small and operationalized for years and years, but something that they want to have information on now.
Thank you. No further questions. Thanks.
Are there any other further clarifying questions? Leslie, looks like you have one. Okay, well, let's get a motion on the table then. If there's no other clarifying questions, we'll take a motion.
I can move to, I assume we're talking about the purple and not the report, correct? Just want to clarify.
I think they're one and the same, but the
All right.
motion is stated in the purple.
Yes, okay. I can move to approve the acceptance of the audit report for 2023, 2024, and fund balance report.
Motion by Mary, is there a second? Second by Leslie. All right, is there any further discussion? Leslie, this is where you could jump in.
Okay, so first of all, thank you and your team for all the hard work you do every single year getting us this information and the excellent job of putting all this together for us. I was noticing on 6, which is the big wonderful pie chart that talks about our revenue, and year over year how from 2023 to 2024, and I bet if we look back it would be kind of the same thing, whereas the state dropped 3%, the Fed dropped 3%, and I was just hit with a wave of appreciation for our community once again, because where would we be in our revenues if our community did not support this school district and all of our kids that we have coming through here and helping them to learn and giving them the most excellent teachers we possibly can. So thank you again, community. We really appreciate it.
So I have a question. reading through the purple, it came up a couple times, and it came up actually in the overview of the report that we have a general fund balance that's like, what, 16.5%, and our target is 10%. But in the purple, it said multiple times that, I'm trying to see, right, the district should continue to actively work to increase unassigned fund balances in order to meet cash flow goals of board policy 61104. And then later on, it talked about, and you also talked about this, Andy, that as we become more dependent on property taxes, that we need to think about our cash flow. And there's a paragraph near the end that talks about how if we were to, spend a significant amount of the assigned funds, that we could potentially have a cash flow problem at some point. So my question is, do we need to think about the 10% number as being too low at this point, and think about where we would like that number to be so that we do avoid cash flow problems, especially if we become more property tax dependent? I mean, is the 10%, sounds to me like maybe the 10% is too low right now?
Yeah, so the way that board policy was designed is 10% isn't really the goal, 10% is the floor. If we hit that 10%, then all of a sudden we got to come with plans and everything to how do we get back to at least the 10%. The goal, and you have to also realize that that policy is 20 some years old, and at the time we were a little bit over 10%, but we weren't cash flowing. We were actually having to go to the bank and borrow. So for probably the last 10 years or so, we've been in this situation that we've hadn't had to go borrow, except for 1 year where we had to buy some property related to Forest Edge. And it was very minor. But for the most part, we've been in a good position. What's happened recently is the values of the properties in Oregon School District have gone up so high compared to everybody else in the state that has changed that mix where we became, and people hate it when I say this word, negative tertiary aided. Which means when we spend $1, we actually spend a little bit more than $1 because we lose a little bit of state aid. And so that pushes more property taxes, pushes our funding proposal to more property taxes. And so then that's what I was saying before. We don't get our property taxes until the second half of the year. And so that first half of the year, typically, until we get those property taxes, we're cash poor a little bit. So those different components that are happening right now are definitely influencing it. We should relook at the policy anyhow, because I want to change so that we can correlate with how the auditor looks at fund balance percentage with what we look at fund balance percentage. We could absolutely look at that percentage. It's probably too low now compared to where it was, kind of as our floor even. But our goal is always to just make sure that we have enough money to cash flow. So, and we're in a good spot right now, but we have that $5 million of the assigned fund balance. We're going to spend probably a good, I would say in the next year, $2 million of it. And so if we spend that $2 million, at that point in time, if you look at our financial statements that we give you on a monthly basis, we're going to be right at the target in November. Or we're going to be right at that amount of money. So if we spend any more than that $2 million, we're going to probably have to cash flow at least in the month of November and possibly January. So that's where this is all coming from, is I don't want to surprise you or anything. We're definitely above the 10%. We're in a good spot, but we need to start making some actions, strategic actions, to understand that things have kind of changed in the last 3 or 4 years. And the referendum and the support from the community has absolutely helped us to thrive the way we have, but it also has shifted that balance a little bit. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. So maybe the 10%, maybe we should think about raising the floor.
I think that would probably be a good idea. I hadn't seriously considered that because I'm always focused on the goal and I haven't had to worry about the floor, but maybe it would make some sense in our new situation that we think about the floor as well.
Mary, I think the policy committee just got another assignment. So, any other discussion?
Yeah. So I was kind of heading in the same direction as Caleb because, you know, if our calculations were as presented in the purple, coming up with a 19.84%, but the calculations are going to change, and the equivalent calculations are, what was this, 16.5. How does that impact what the percentage should be in the policy? So obviously we'll be revisiting the policy. But I think it would be very helpful in that conversation to really understand what the floor is that keeps us with a positive cash flow.
Other discussion? All right, and I will just reiterate to the audience that this is fifth or sixth time that we have been talking about the 23-24 budget this year. So don't be surprised that our discussion is not lengthy, because it really has been quite lengthy. With that, we have, let's see, where are we at? Yep. We're at discussion. So we have a motion and a second. We're ready to vote. Katie, could you please call the roll?
Dr. Lakuta? Yes. Ms. Wright? Yes. Ms. Bijak?
Yes.
Dr. Bush?
Yes.
Ms. Garrison?
Yes.
Mr. Pankratz?
Yes. Motion carries 6-0. All right. Now we are on to discussion items. Committee reports. So let's start with vision, and that's Heather.
Thank you. Our next meeting is on the 18th. My phone is off and away, so let me look. I don't, here it is, hang on. Oh, it's not, it's on my person. 5:15. Thank you.
And Heather, do we have an agenda for that meeting yet? Do you know?
We don't, but it'll be posted per statute.
Okay.
At least 24 hours prior.
Excellent. Thank you, Heather. Moving over to policy, and Mary.
Yeah, we just had a policy committee meeting just immediately prior to this one, continuing our conversations on electronic communication. And we have the next meeting is scheduled for January 13th at 5:15. So yeah, and thank you, Gina.
Great. Thank you both. Next up, we're moving to information items, starting with visioning and strategic planning. Dr. Bergstrom.
Thank you. I think we'll go right to slide 14, because a significant component of the outcome of our visioning and strategic planning is the state report card. And I know that that is just a snapshot regarding our students and how well they perform, and they are all so much more than what is on the report card. And the report card doesn't measure some of our amazing options that lead to incredible student growth, such as what was shared previously about the music program. However, they do play a role in guiding us related to where we need to really further learn and grow on behalf of our students. So tonight we have our Learning and Student Achievement team here, which is Darcy Jarstead and John Tanner, and they're going to talk about the successes that really are evident in this year's state report cards. Please go ahead.
All right. No, it really said it was very strange.
Batteries? Nope.
Well, now it's lit up. Does it work now?
Not very well.
Not really. All right. Bad night for tech, apparently. Don't know why the TV isn't working either.
It's in cahoots with the microphone.
Yes. All right, working better. There we go. All right, well, thank you. Now that we've gotten that situated, we are going to be, mostly going to be talking about the state report cards, and then that'll lead into some of the strategies that we're using to continue maintaining our achievement and progressing. And so Darcy will take over that part. First of all, we have, this is the summary that you've already seen before of the state report cards. And these are good signs. These are the scores, basically the overall district score and the school scores. One of the things that usually comes up is, okay, what do these mean and how do they come here? So go to the next slide here, and we've got the 4 components that are used to do this score calculation. So the pie chart there shows how much each different component is worth. So achievement is the bulk of it, 37%. And this is basically the state assessment scores of the forward exam only on reading and math. So that's a big chunk, but it is not, it's limited in what it's actually measuring. The next part is growth, measured from year to year. You may remember a meeting a few months ago where we went through a sort of complicated explanation of why growth is kind of hard to address this year because of the change of the benchmarks that were used because the standards changed. So growth is still a component, and they've done some mathematical wizardry to be able to do some comparisons, but not all. And so we'll let you know when we're talking about apples to apples comparisons and when we're not. But growth is basically 12.7%. And so that's not as big a portion, but it is something that we're evaluated on. The target group outcomes in academic performance, the target group is the lowest quartile of students and from the prior year. And so every year the outcomes of that lowest group are included as part of the calculation to see how well you did to bring up that, that bottom quartile. And then a quarter of it is on track to graduation. And there are 4 components to that as well, which we'll go over in a minute. One interesting thing to keep in mind is that the weights for the district and the weights for each school, like every pie is going to look a little bit different. And because they have different areas, like generally the growth is dependent on the socioeconomic status of the school or district that it's applied to. So it's not the same pie chart for each school. We're going to start with some areas of celebration. The biggest one is that overall OSD exceeds expectations. Mary, do you have a question?
Yes.
Okay.
Is it different for every school or different for every district?
Both.
Okay, interesting. Thank you.
Yep. So, yeah, so the overall good news is that overall OSD exceeds expectations. All of our schools are categorized as either meeting, exceeding, or significantly exceeding expectations. Going to the next one. This is another area of celebration. I know that you cannot read this. However, I'm going to tell you what it means. Basically, blue squares are good. So that's the real visual check. What these are showing is the value added scores for each different demographic group in English on the left and math on the right. So if these scores were further to the left, on the left side of the line that goes down the center, they would not be filled in blue, they would be empty. These scores are value-added scores, and the reason that's important is because they take a look at each different demographic group in our district, and they compare the growth of students in that specific demographic group with students from a similar demographic background in the rest of the state who took the same test in the same year. So these aren't normed off past years or anything. This is actually comparing how our students in a demographic group did compared to the same demographic group students in the entire state for that year. So for example, and I'm just going to pick one here because you can't read it, but for English language arts, our English learners, and it says there were 94 of them in our district, our English learners had a value added or growth score of 3.5. The middle is 3. These are converted finally to a 0 to 6 scale, or basically a 1 to 6 scale. So 3 is the absolute average, and so anything that is to the right or higher than 3 is a positive. And this is really good because sometimes being in a fairly well-resourced area of the state with a lot of educational opportunities and parents who can provide things for their students means that we would naturally have students who can achieve higher due to things like financial support, familial encouragement, educated parents, lots of resources nearby, like the university, good public libraries, etc. However, what this means is that we're only compared, it strips that out. What the value added tries to do is eliminate all the factors that are outside of the school. So by only comparing students who are English learners or who have low socioeconomic status or who access IEPs or who are of certain racial or ethnic group, it actually takes out all the external factors and it only focuses on what the school provides. So this is a really good indicator of the value that Oregon School District provides to our students, getting rid of all the external factors. So this is why I focus on it, because it really is looking at what we can do and what we have done. So this is the district-wide chart. Again, language arts is on the left, math is on the right, dark blue is good. Each school also has this calculation, so if you look in the school report cards, you can see that, but that's a level of detail we're not really going into tonight. All right, another area of celebration is that Brooklyn is in the significantly exceeds expectations category, which is the highest one that we have. So that's awesome. That is really high, and we're just really proud of Brooklyn for doing that. So yay, Brooklyn. There's an area of celebration. We're going to move on to, one other area of celebration. This is really awesome. Oregon High School actually ranks number 2 in Dane County of high schools. This has moved up from past years. And so, although we don't love to compare ourselves to other people, that's natural. So when, we look at like, oh, how are we doing compared to so-and-so? It's just like, how does your football team compare to the rest of the Badger Conference? We're like, how do our academics compare to the rest of Dane County? And so Oregon High School is second in Dane County, second only to Wisconsin Heights. So if you, like me, went to another Dane County high school and you want to know how we did compared to our old high schools, you can be like, ooh, we did better than them. So that's kind of nice. Another really cool, so that's basically our rank in Dane County. The other really cool thing is that Oregon High School is in the top 1% in the state for its growth. So again, it's not just that it's high proficiency, it's also that it's extremely high growth. So we're above the 99th percentile in growth for the whole state. So those are obviously really good areas of celebration. So good job to Oregon High School and the work that they've done to have a really high standard and to be top 1% in growth. So their student reps, you can take that back to people and tell them, hey, our school rocks, we're doing really well. Two-way communication here with the student reps, it's good. All right, moving on to areas of opportunity. This is an area of opportunity that has been noticed in the past and has not, and this is one of those things that's going to take a while, but it's increasing the growth in the middle grades. So our growth score in the middle grades, basically we're talking about 5 through 8, is not where we'd like it to be. It's hard because we have schools that we have an elementary school. Forest Edge is considered an elementary school. It has grades 5 and 6. Rome Corners is considered an intermediate school. It has grades 5 and 6. The state report card doesn't break things down in a nice way for that, but basically we're looking at grades 5 through 8. So growth score, obviously, from what you can see here, is even though we have fairly high rates of proficiency, our growth is something that we would like to improve. Now, it did improve slightly from last year, but it really remains a priority area. So that's one area of opportunity we want to continue working on. I can turn my...
The on button? Yeah, that one? Yeah, it's Monday. Can you help me understand the growth number? What does that actually mean? Does that mean, what is the 50.8? That's a percentile ranking? What is that?
I can't explain it easily. It's a calculated score that the state uses based on multiple factors, but I can't tell you what it is.
What is the saying then? I'm having a hard time. I'm with you on the good news, and I'm with you on the overall report card score, but what is the saying?
So our growth, which is different than proficiency, because we're fairly high in proficiency, but our growth is not as where we'd like it to be. So in this case, with English language arts, like our middle school had a 54.6 score, which is a composite scale. It's not percentage, but it's a composite scale from 0 to 100, compared to the state average of 66. So we would really like to be above the state average in our growth scores as well as our proficiency. Math, we are at 47 compared to 66 for for grades 6 through 8. Again, it's a kind of weird thing because we don't have a 6-8 school, unlike most, so you bring in some other factors from 3 different schools here.
So is that saying, so if the state is at a 66 and we're a 47, that we're X percentage off worse than the state average?
Well, you could probably determine that, but these aren't percentages. These are
right. I mean,
calculated
yes,
scores.
I could do.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. And what is the 50.8 then signifying?
The 50.8 is a different calculation, which is based off of the both the English language arts and the math under the growth. I don't think it's an average of the two, but it's close to that. So it incorporates the growth scores from both areas.
And bear with me, remind me how this is the growth category, right? So how is that calculated? Or where is the data coming from to create our score?
Okay, it comes from the past years of data. And so basically you have the math and the ELA forward test scores, and it looks at where you were in the past, and it takes mostly from the prior year, but actually goes back as many as 3 years to take a look at the growth trends over the past 3 years. So the easiest way to think of it is, how have we done compared to the past? We're not growing, but I can't tell you that it's exactly based on just last year, because there's some interesting weighted way that they take things from 2 years ago and 3 years ago as well to start to calculate the growth.
John, do you think that the fact that we have a 7-8 building instead of a 6-8 building is like overly negatively influencing this calculation, since we're talking about we're comparing ourselves to statewide averages and we're maybe a minority grade band? Or do you think that's not a factor?
In the past, I would have said yes. I wouldn't really say that anymore. I think it's probably pretty, I don't think that's a significant factor.
So do they take data for each of the grade levels, 5, 8? So like, do they take 5 and 6 out of FES? How do they view our schools?
They take, middle school is considered a middle school, Forest Edge is considered an elementary school, and RCI is considered an intermediate or a middle school, depending
So for FES, that's lumped into the...
It's lumped into elementary.
Even though it's 5, 6?
Yes. Because you have to pick one when you categorize a school.
So they're...
For state reporting.
Oh, sorry.
So they're not using FES data in this middle school
No.
thing.
This particular graph is only grades 7 and 8. They don't give us a graph that says 5 through 8 or even 6 through 8, because they do it on a per school basis. Like, we can calculate them separately, which I've done. It just, that's pretty in the weeds. So I can show that to you if you want a different time.
Do you... Mary, can you turn off this thing? Oh, yeah, I can. In the cases where you have done that, do the numbers change appreciably?
Here's the other part of this, is that what we were able to do this year, if you remember that part about not being able to compare past years to this year, so we were able to take a look at, since we can't compare our scores directly from last year to this year, the way that we can actually determine what our growth is by proxy is to say, okay, last year in 23-24, totally new forward test, different scoring. So by and large, because it was aligning to the new standards, everyone's scores went up a bit. What we can do is calculate the average growth from the rest of the state, and then we can calculate our growth and see how much ours went higher or lower than the state average growth. So that's a way to look at, by grade level, how these actually moved. So that gives us an idea that we did, like how we did. And actually the next slide is an example of what that looks like.
But do our priority weights change each year as well for each of the schools?
Yeah. Because the demographics change every year.
Right. So that's not even a great way of comparing. From
No,
year to year.
it's not very granular. This is, I'd say this is like a broad brush look. And so I wouldn't go, the point of showing you this was to say, boy, I'd really love it if more of that circle was filled, because our growth is not where we want it to be. And we definitely need to get above the state average. Like, we would really like that. So this is a broad indicator of areas that we want to continue to focus on. But if you want to get into the details of like specific grade levels and content areas and things like that, we can definitely do that. But that wasn't the point of this. So, and we definitely are focusing on those things. Like, I talked with principals frequently and had conversations today about like, what are the specific things that you're doing in these areas. So we are doing those things. We don't, honestly, like at a teacher level, you're never going to look at this and know what to do, because this is so abstracted from what you do daily in the classroom. And even at a principal level, you're looking at your school. This is higher level than that.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, comparing last year to this year isn't necessarily a fair assessment. And you do want to be able to look at it and say, oh, we've improved, or no, we haven't improved. But with like the priority weights changing, you don't even necessarily know. I mean, you have to do additional calculation.
Yeah, state report cards tend to be sort of broad, and that's kind of what they are by nature. So if we go to the next one, though, this is an area of celebration and opportunity. So a year ago, when I came to you and showed you a slide very similar to this one, the area that had the most growth needed in our on track to graduation was 8th grade math. Now, we've shifted. We're no longer talking about growth. This is our district-wide on track to graduation score. So the on track to graduation score is 90.1. Now, that is not our graduation rate. Our graduation rate is 96.8. Okay, so that's again a composite score that tells something on a 100-point scale, but that's not our graduation rate. Our graduation rate is really high. There are 4 different components in our on track to graduation. Chronic absenteeism, which for us really is not much of a problem. Our historic graduation rate, so our actual graduation rate last year was 96.8, and it actually technically takes into consideration a 4-year and a 6-year. There's a bunch of nuances here, but anyway. And then it looks at 3rd grade English language arts, which is really interesting because that is a highly correlated measurement, which is kind of freaky to think that in 3rd grade English language arts, you can have a pretty good idea of whether a kid's going to graduate or not. But that's a really important indicator. And 8th grade math. So these are the 4 components that the state uses to give us an on track to graduation score, because they're highly predictive of whether a student is going to graduate from high school. So a year ago when I came here, I said, well, our lowest one of these, or the area with the most opportunity, is 8th grade math. And it had a score of 55.8. Again, that's not a percentage or anything, that's just a score. And you may remember that at the time I said, hey, we had noticed a problem a few years prior, and so we had undergone a curriculum review process, worked with the math teachers in grades 6 through 8, so not just 8th grade, but 6 through 8, and we adopted a new curriculum that aligned to the current math standards, because the old one didn't. And included in that is a ton of work by our 6-8 math teachers. They spent lots of time during the summer, lots of time during the year, For the prior year in 22-23, they piloted new math curriculum. They did a ton of professional learning. And we continued that. What's really cool about this is that last year was the first year that we actually had this curriculum in place. And so it was actually being taught. It's called CPM. It's the same thing the high school uses. And part of that is like I said, a lot of professional development. We have coaching by a trained person who comes in from the company, who does, they called instructional site visits, where she comes in and she watches everybody in their first and second year of implementing the new curriculum and meets with them individually to give them feedback. She does that a couple times a year. We run professional development that happens here. So this isn't just like, hey, we bought a new textbook, here you go, things happen. This is a lot of work by our staff, which I really want to acknowledge. But the really cool part is that we had identified that curriculum and we implemented it in the 22-23 school year. And our scores went up. Now remember, everyone's scores went up. So this is where we did the thing where we took the average. So our average score, or our score, went from like a 55 to a 62.2. That's up 6.4. The state whole average only went up like 3.5. So we almost doubled the average growth of the state, which is good because that means that it's something unique to us. It's not just the rising tide lifts all boats. Like, we actually did something and we saw the results of it. So to me, that's really encouraging. Now, are we where we want to be? Not yet. This is still the area for on track to graduation that we have probably the most, well, that we do have the most opportunities for growth. But it's really exciting because it shows we put a lot of effort into it. Teachers worked really hard on a lot of different aspects, got a lot of good professional development, and really got to know their students and focused on it. And we had great results. So that's pretty awesome. We doubled the average growth we doubled the growth, or we doubled the increase. I shouldn't say growth. We doubled the increase in the proficiency for our 8th graders compared to the state average, which is awesome. And we were really high in the bar chart you see on the bottom. Our overall on track to graduation is like really high. So we're really doing well in our on track to graduation. And I really just like to point out this because we want to continue with this trend. And we're pretty hopeful that we have reason to believe that it's going to continue being better because last year was the first year that curriculum was in grades 6, 7, and 8. So next year, the 8th graders who are going to be measured on this will have an additional year of the CPN curriculum by the teachers who spent all the time implementing it and getting professionally developed. Year after that, it will be students who've had 3 years of that. So we're really encouraged that this is going to continue. Still an area of opportunity to growth, but a way to really celebrate that we put effort into something that we saw and made a difference on it. So we're happy with that one. The action steps that remain, this is obviously where we go with this, is we want to complete the ELA curriculum implementation in grades 6 through 8. I haven't talked about that a ton tonight because that 8th grade math is one of the things that the state looks at really closely. But back to that whole growth area that we want to be better in ELA in our grades, in our middle grades. Well, this is the first year that we're implementing a brand new English language arts curriculum in grades 6 through 8. Darcy has done a ton of work over the last few years implementing the curriculum, training all the teachers in letters, in structured literacy. We continued that training into the middle grades, and we have a new curriculum that is well aligned with foundational literacy or structural literacy. And this is year 1, so we don't know what the results are yet, but we're going to next year, and we're really encouraged that that's going to be a positive for us. The other thing, obviously, is we're in year 2 of the math curriculum implementation. We want to continue to support that with those instructional site visits. And I really need to give a shout out to Celia Pazwa, who's our K-8 math coordinator, because she has really spearheaded that, and she's really good at developing consensus and really putting the work in and spearheading that, which is great. The third main thing that we want to do, especially in our middle grades, we want to implement AVID strategies at the middle school. This is an idea that's been around for a little while, and Heidi Walter is really dedicated. She has experience from prior AVID schools, so she knows what it's like, and she is making some really good strides toward implementing this, introducing it to the staff, and we're committing to launching that next year. So we're finding the staff to do it. We're going to send people to training this summer, create a team. And the high school has implemented it now for quite like 6 years. And so we're working closely with the high school to make sure that we do it well with a really good site team and really good implementation of it. And then the last part, and this is probably the most important one, is as you know, we've been talking about the sale process, which Darcy's going to tell you more about in a minute. But we're really looking at increasing the instructional clarity for teachers and students about what we're learning, why we're learning it, and how students can demonstrate it, and also regularly analyzing the student work that's happening in PLCs. Because looking at these charts and graphs doesn't really mean much to a teacher. I mean, it gives an idea that like as a whole, we need to do something different, but that's mostly from our level. What teachers can do and what they are doing is regularly looking, well, we're shifting to do this more. Like we want to increase the frequency and the ability to do this because it's hard, but we're increasing the frequency of teachers getting together in their professional learning communities, looking at the work that their students did, looking at what worked and what didn't, who benefited and who didn't, and then from that student work saying, okay, now what are we going to do differently in our instruction to make sure that everybody improves? And then coming back and saying, okay, how did that work? So really analyzing and doing that PDSA cycle of like, what are we going to do differently? So that's huge. And when, you know, we talk about the things that we want to change to improve, this isn't really a change. This is continuing to do the things that research states and that we've seen work really well. So that's that sale process. And Darcy's going to give you an update on where we are in our second year of sale. But before I turn it over to Darcy, I wanted to just let you guys ask any other questions you have about the report cards and our response to it and our action steps.
Any further questions? Anna, go ahead.
Yeah, I just have a question about the third strategy that you mentioned on implementing the AVID strategies at OMS. So I know you mentioned that we are using AVID at the high school level, but I know we've talked about, like, is that more of a school-wide implementation or is that a cohort of students? I know maybe at the high school it's a cohort, but there's talk of maybe expanding that because those strategies can help all students. And so I guess I'm wondering if that's the intent with the OMS implementation and as well as potentially high school level school-wide implementation of those strategies.
Very good question. AVID encourages you to go to, they call it AVID school-wide. Like they have a whole like track that you do for that. And AVID, the organization, has found, and they've started to re-emphasize moving to AVID school-wide sooner than they used to. Because it used to be, take this cohort of kids who are sort of in the academic middle, whose family, they would be the first ones going to college, and really support them with organizational strategies, help with the FAFSA, having a college-oriented environment. But then they've said, hey, we really need to spread this to everybody because it's good for everyone. You know, the writing, inquiry, collaboration, organization, and reading are really important things. Those are those strategies that they focus on. So at the middle school, what we're trying to do is do both almost simultaneously. So there will be an AVID elective cohort. So we have a site team made up, we're finalizing the people, but it's basically made up of like 8 people representing different content areas and including somebody from student services like a counselor and some administrators. So that site team operates it for the whole school. And the main focus at first is to have a cohort of students who have an elective. So they take it as an elective where they get really direct instruction on how to use those strategies. And they also have tutorials that give them the practice for how to identify questions they have. But they call them WICOR, W-I-C-O-R, for the writing, inquiry, collaboration, organization, and reading. So those WICOR strategies are ones that you expand to the whole school. The high school, one of the goals for this year is to really expand those WICOR strategies everywhere. And so they actually spent part of their fall in-service days training all the teachers in the school on those strategies that formerly were, I mean, they weren't just isolated to the AVID elective, but they weren't quite as widespread as we'd like. So the high school has started to do that. The middle school is going to start doing that pretty much from like day one. So there's going to be both the elective and the training for all staff because all those things are useful to everybody.
Other questions?
Does that WICOR approach take place like during connections, or does that actually take place in each individual instructional class?
It's meant to be embedded in the instructional portions of the class. Now, there might be like mini lessons and like connections about like organizing, like how to organize your binder. Because typically, like in an AVID elective, AVID has a very sort of prescribed, like organized way that you do things, and that's taught directly to students in the AVID elective. When you go school-wide, you start to incorporate those same practices in the actual instruction classes like that are happening. So if you're a science or social studies or math ELA teacher, you actually teach some of those things like, hey, here's how we, analyze the text, or here's how we identify a point of confusion in the content that we're learning. And then we use that, which is an AVID strategy, as we seek clarification to learn more about that thing that confused us. So those are things that happen in the instructional part, but we could have mini lessons that happen in connections as well as needed.
Okay. I don't
right.
see any further questions. Thank you, John.
Then I will
Move
turn
on
it over to
sale.
Darcy to tell you more about our sale work.
I will tell you a little bit about our sale work. So you probably remember that when we talk about sale, that is the administrative group that goes together to create our goals and then our path to get to our goals throughout the course of the year. And the sale process uses 100-day cycles to create sort of smaller goals that get us up to our academic goal for the year, the summary goal. So our goal in SAIL is to increase proficiency in literacy, specifically in literacy. We chose literacy because it's a part of every content, and we wanted to make the goal as pinpointed and focused as we could. So we decided that it's important for us that we want this goal for every student, not just some. So as an administrative team, then we took a look at how we would go about getting to these goals, and we chose two high leverage strategies that we were going to ensure that everyone was using, which were increasing instructional clarity. And we do that by clearly articulated learning targets, clearly articulated success criteria, and frequent formative checks throughout the class period. And we also selected examining student work frequently through protocols defined in the PLC Plus framework in order to make the necessary instructional changes in real time, which is what John was talking about too, how those high leverage strategies will really work for us. So our very specific goals have metrics attached to them, and the goals are: we will increase the percentage of students demonstrating proficiency of state level standards in reading by at least 5% each year for the next 3 years. And the second one is our student learning goal for students from underserved demographic groups, which the increase in proficiency is 7% instead of 5%, because it shows that we really want to begin to close those gaps that we're seeing. So students in underserved groups are students who access IEPs, students from low SES households, and students whose ethnicity is not white. Or white or Asian, yes. Yes, and multilingual learners. Thank you, John. So the next slide just kind of goes into what those two high leverage strategies are that we're using. So instructional clarity ensures that students understand what they're learning, they understand why it matters, and they understand how to demonstrate their learning. By combining this with the practice of analyzing student work in PLCs, teachers are collaboratively using real-time data to identify any learning gaps, to refine their instruction, and then together to put those gaps into the new instruction in the upcoming days. So then they come back together and they say, how did that work? So what we intend to do is just to create this cycle of clarity, collaboration, and very responsive teaching that drives improved outcomes for all students. When you take a look at the next slide, so this is when we started. Our first 100-day cycle was the beginning of summer until November, and in our first 100-day cycle we really were focused on taking a look at what the adult actions were. So when we did walkthroughs, we were looking at what the adult behavior was in the classroom. Was there a clearly posted learning target? Were there frequent checks for understanding from the adult? And when we think about those first 100 days, a lot of our PLC conversations were, what did we teach? Did we do it? And we kind of had these very surface level metrics for defining what we were doing based on what the adult behavior was in the classroom and in the PLC. And what we're doing in this next 100-day cycle is deepening our work so that we're incorporating things that the students are doing and how is this impacting students. So one of the things that we have changed to is we're adding student voice into our walkthroughs. So when teams walk through classrooms, they'll ask a couple of students in each of the classrooms, what are you learning and why is that important? How can you show that you know that? So we'll be having conversations with the students, and further in our PLCs, we are going to talk about and we're going to be measuring how are we changing the instruction to really impact the student outcomes. So when we have data in front of us, what are the decisions that we're going to make to improve student outcomes as we move forward? So the next slide then just summarizes what the metrics look like, because part of the SAIL process is putting metrics on how we're going to measure each of these things that we say we're going to do. So one of the things that we are going to measure is that each PLC analyzes student work at least 3 times throughout the course of this 100-day cycle. We're going to take a look at 75% of the teachers who are surveyed. There'll be a survey at the end of the 100-day cycle. 75% of those teachers will be able to describe how they changed their instruction as a result of using the protocols in PLCs. And during our walkthroughs, at least 50% of the students who are asked will be able to describe what they're learning and why. And that is our plan for this 100 days, which ends in March.
Okay, questions for the team on SAIL? Mary, go ahead.
So, sorry, I'm not fully with it. The first question I have is, so what's the total duration of a SAIL process? I mean, I know they're 100-day grouped cycles, but how long do the cycles go before you then focus on something different?
So the SAIL process that's run through ASA is a 2-year cycle. So it's really teaching us how to use that plan, do, study, act whole process in a way that's really meaningful and using metrics. So we have coaches that work with us, and each 100-day cycle we take a look at how did we do with the 100-day cycle and what do we have to tweak in regards to how we're going to measure or what we're going to be looking for in the next 100 days. So at the end of this upcoming school year, it will be the end of our 2 years with the ASA people, but we still want to use this process to determine what our 100-day cycles are going to look like. So I believe we're going to have a coach working with us for part of the time still, but outside of the ASA actual network. So it's a 2-year process.
Nice, okay. I forgot my other question, so. Excuse me?
Share what we did with student leadership teams.
At 3 in the morning.
I will.
Oh, so in the past, in our first year of implementation, we took just our our administrative team to SAIL, and then we kind of filled in with, we filled in our leadership teams, and what we realized was there was kind of a gap because we didn't feel like we had done it, clearly enough for everyone in a way that really empowered each of the schools to really own where they lived in the SAIL process. So this last year, what we did is our administrative team went to SAIL, and then we came together. Is this what you're talking about, John? Then we came together after SAIL so that we could build an experience for our student leadership team. So each of the schools could bring in their leadership teams and hear the same message so everyone understood Why are we selecting this goal? Why are we selecting these high leverage strategies to reach our goal? And what really clearly is our goal? So everyone got to own that together.
I did remember my other question. When you say walk through, are you talking about just walking through classes that are ongoing and then asking the, yeah.
So together we created something that's called an adult learning framework so that we could really clearly identify what it looked like for, learning targets at a beginning, at a developing, and at a fluent stage. So we have this rubric that's created, and then we really did walk through classrooms and keep an eye out for those things. And so then each school then got their data back, so it made it very responsive to the teachers what the principal or what the student leadership team's next move was to push into for professional development with respect to instructional clarity.
So your walkthroughs were observation as well as interaction?
The first set was all observation. The second set will be observation and interaction, yes.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
I have a question about the PLCs where they're going to be analyzing student work. What are the goals of the conversation? Is it, I'm thinking about it in terms of is it to make sure that they're analyzing student work in similar ways across different classes? Is it to come up with to brainstorm for new ways to approach the subject matter? Is it, or is it all of the above? I was just kind of curious to hear what the purpose is, or what's the goal of the analyzing the student work and the outcome?
So it actually is all of the above. And if you go back to, slide 27, I think, maybe, it shows you what the questions are in the analyzing student work when we do analyzing student work, these protocols. So we want to, as a team, understand where we're going, where are we now, and then what do we need to do to move the learning forward. So sometimes it can be a celebration, like teachers can say, I got this really great result out of, this instructional technique that I use with my students for whatever standard we're working on. And sometimes it can be just collaboration and being sort of curious, like, how did you get the results that you got, so that we're having these collaborative conversations. One of the biggest things that we really need to get to also in our PLCs is that question number 5. So who benefited and who didn't? So that we can start to take a look at some of those groups of students who may not be benefiting from the curriculum or the access to the curriculum, so that we can have our instructional moves shift to make sure that the universal is accessible by all students.
Can I add something?
Yeah.
One advantage of working with SAIL is they've worked with districts across the state, and so there are lots of places that have already developed protocols for doing the analyzing student work. So we have rubrics that look at things like, how have we calibrated our proficiency from different teachers? Like, are we all measuring our students with the same thing? How frequently do we actually look at the student work? What kind of data are we analyzing? How are we analyzing it? And then how are we responding to it? So there's a lot of examples that we're compiling that are way more detailed than what you see up on the screen, because slides don't want that amount of detail. And so we have rubrics that actually allow us to analyze what our process is, and they're fairly well developed from other districts that have gone before us. So we're actually looking right now at a number of different protocols that we can share with teachers to make it a lot easier to go through the process in a fairly efficient manner, because it can take a while to do that. And so, and the more frequently we do it, the hope is that we'll get better at doing it more quickly.
Thanks. That really spoke to what I was trying to figure out what the goals were, and I think you helped me get there. So thank you.
All right, last call for questions. All right, thank you much, John and Darcy. Much appreciated. Great job.
Thank you.
Next up is our superintendent's report.
Thank you, everybody. And before I get into celebrating, which some of it is a great crossover from what Addie and Wesley spoke about earlier, before I get into that, I just want to say what a great team of leaders Mr. Tanner and Ms. Jarstead are in this area, how really talented our math and literacy coordinators are, but then also just really saying that our educators are amazing. And Act 20 that you all have heard of related to required legislative focused reading changes. Our educators right now are not only doing all of this, but they're also working with all of the changes that have been brought about from Act 20. And so I can't say enough about the job they do for our students. All the way from John and Darcy into the classroom, they are all really great people. Thank you. Here I go. Next thing. So another thank you to our substitute teachers, because very often the people who are doing the amazing work in our classrooms, they need to be able to be home when their children are sick, or they are working through an assessment protocol and need a substitute educator in the classroom. And they are so appreciated. November 22nd was Substitute Educator Day, and we're very thankful for our Oregon School District substitutes. They're an essential part of our schools. Our building subs are every bit of a building staff member. They are a part of the team, as are the ones who come in to help us with a different assignment in different buildings every day. And we're always looking for great people. So if you're out there and you're interested, go to our website and learn more and apply, because that is really important. The next thing, as was mentioned by Addie and Wesley, Mike Derrick was recognized at a UW-Madison football game, one of 10 educators in Wisconsin selected for this WEA Outstanding Educator Award. And given how many years Mike coached football, it's kind of fun that he got this particular award at a football game. And speaking of awards, it took quite a bit of cajoling to even get this included, but it had to be included. Because the Oregon School District was recently honored at the Wisconsin School Public Relations Association, or you may have heard it referred to as WSPRA, with 2 Spectrum Awards of Excellence for its work in school communication. So this happened in November the 13th through the 15th, but the OSD earned an Award of Excellence, including Best of Category, and that's Best of Category for the entire state, for the newly designed website, www.oregonsd.org. So that was Best in State for the website. That's pretty amazing. And we also received an Award of Excellence for the district's video about what it's like to work in the OSD. So congratulations to Erica Mundinger. In addition to our really great tech department professionals and the administrative assistants at each school who work together to launch this website. It is always a team effort, but I can't say enough about the leader of that team, and that is our communications director. And then fun time learning in 4K. Yes, that is shaving cream. So the students at Oregon Preschool Inc., the 4Kers, have been exploring shaving cream to draw pictures and practice their letters. So this is something that everybody could even do at home. It's a great sensory activity and allows kids to make shapes and then erase them and do them again. So it's a perfect blend of creativity and skill building. And then our Brooklyn students, this is a picture of the Reading Buddies program that they had here. Miss Abley's first graders had a fantastic time reading with their 3rd grade buddies in Miss Bouchane's class at Brooklyn Elementary. Our first graders proudly shared their books, and then they were all ears as their 3rd grade reading buddies read fluently, setting a wonderful example of confident and expressive reading. And it's always special when the older students inspire the younger students as readers. And I don't know about you, but I can remember having a reading buddy and being a reading buddy. And as can most of my relatives, because it was a topic of conversation Saturday night around the dinner table. Because this is the type of memory that kids really hold on to, is that opportunity they have to be with their reading buddies. And then Brooklyn celebrates their PBIS goals. So they achieved their PBIS, just for a reminder, is positive behavior intervention and support. And they achieved their goals related to perseverance, initiative, and responsibility. So for their hard work, they enjoyed cozy, comfy kindness coloring all school celebration. So way to go, Brooklyn. And they do look cozy. And Netherwood had a kindness retreat, and I could hear them through the walls because we're connected to the gym. So I could hear the enthusiasm for the kindness retreat. The fourth graders are united for this retreat, and the key learning objectives of the retreat were to understand why and how to make kind choices, practice empathy skills to understand how words and actions affect others, and develop several conflict resolution strategies that can be used in response to unkind actions. The students enjoyed a high energy day practicing kindness and developing a stronger sense of belonging. And then our Prairie View students celebrated literacy learning. So this is students in Mrs. Main's class at Prairie View, and they recently completed their first literacy module, schools and community. So to celebrate their hard work, the students visited Miss Diane's kindergarten class to share the amazing books they created. Once again, this will be something they probably remember for far longer than you think they will. These books compare and contrast different schools and highlight the most important aspects of school life. So seeing our students share their learning with the younger students is what it's all about, right? Building connections and fostering this love of learning for all ages is really special. RCI had their orchestra concert, so our intermediate musicians had an amazing concert. Their hard work and their preparation certainly paid off, and the music brings a lot of joy. So we love hearing you play, and it's a very special thing. RCI also had a STEAM robotic petting zoo activity. So check out these innovative creations from our 6th grade STEAM students at RCI. They designed and built robotic animals that use sensors, LEDs, and motors to interact with their environment. These are amazing creations. So thanks to Ms. Sengos for designing this engaging learning experience. And you can actually check out a fun video on the Oregon Facebook page, The Robotic Petting Zoo. The middle school had a special display at their school library in honor of Pearl Harbor. You can always count on our libraries to help our students find the most timely and relevant materials to complement their learning. We always appreciate everything that they do. And then congratulations to the OSD Lego League students who participated in the Wolfpack Badgerland Regional Tournament. So teams were all smiles all day as they participated in the 3 heats and presented their project to a panel of judges. One OSD team, Electric Specs, earned the Excellence in Engineering Award and will be advancing to the regional tournament in December. That'll be exciting to see. And speaking of exciting to see, we have just the best school nutrition team, and they're constantly taking the extra step to make sure that the cafeteria is also an extension of the classroom. So recently the team hosted a try-it day, and you're familiar with those. And this one at the middle school featured turkey meatball faux noodle dish. So during try-it days, our school nutrition team offers samples of new foods to students and gathers feedback, and this one was a big hit. So many students are requesting that it be added to the menu rotation. So thank you for doing that, our school nutrition team. And then look at this wonderful group. Congrats to our 6 OHS students who chose to attend the UW-Madison Winter Band Clinic earlier this month with a guest conductor and Emmy Award-winning composer, Julie Giroux. So we have Braden Bartlett on the clarinet, Cameron Fox on the tuba, Lucy Fratkin-Annan on the euphonium, Gage Cleric on the bass clarinet, Hannah Meisner on the clarinet, and Alex Nelson on the trumpet. An additional day of learning with students from all over Wisconsin and Illinois, and the students had access to sessions with UW-Madison students and professors, as well as performed in a shared concert that night with the UW-Madison Wind Ensemble. So congratulations to the students. That's really fantastic. As is this, look at this wonderful group of kids who are a part of there's actually 14 of them, a part of the Badger Conference Honors Band at Verona High School. So the students were joined from 15 Badger Conference schools to come together and study and perform a wide range of music. Learning in action is really on display with these rehearsals and the concerts as the students had the opportunity to work with Dr. John Lynch, the director of bands at UW Stevens Point. So that's really special. And OHS had their football recognition banquet. We had several fall sport banquets, of course. And OHS had their annual awards. And we love that so many of our coaches are also educators and that they go above and beyond to create this really inclusive environment in which there's a place for everybody on the team. And we're so proud of our student athletes, and we love watching you play. And the OHS swim team meet. Look at this proud group of individuals. The OHS swim team, this is the girls' team, and it had an amazing showing during the WIAA state meet. Our team placed 5th overall out of 84 Division I teams. This is the highest ever for Oregon. So a few highlights of the meet. Our team scored in every individual swim at the meet. 7 individual swims were new lifetime bests. That's incredible. 2 new team relay school records, the 200 medley relay and the 400 free relay. 3 new individual school records. Olivia Sina became our first ever Division I state champion in the 100-meter backstroke. 4 swims are up for, wow, All-American consideration. And Olivia Sina 100 back is an All-American swim time. So a special thanks to our amazing coach, Justin Sauren, who's created this really inclusive environment where kids are encouraging one another, and it allows our students to succeed. So we're really proud of you and love watching you swim, and that's an amazing list of accomplishments. Our OHS legislature is in session. So our students in our simulation-based political science classes recently put their learnings into practice during a day of committee hearings. Students read the bills they had prepared and engaged in deliberation, debate, and ultimately a vote to determine which would move on to the full session that will take place next month. The committees use parliamentary procedure to run their committees. We all know how challenging that is, which offered a way for students to fully experience the political process. So thanks to Mr. Wigman and Mr. Bonsall for designing this fantastic hands-on learning experience. And for next year's juniors, remember, this becomes a requirement. As part of our graduation requirements. So this year was really a test run to get this down, and we were able, I and Ms. Mundinger and Mr. Pliner, we were all able to observe some of these committee hearings, and I can't wait to see the whole school engage in something like this. It was really exciting. OHS Panther Construction, the crew led by Mr. Prahl, is doing a great job with their home building project. And it's always nice to have an enclosed classroom once the season starts to change. So I am so happy for them that they are now at least partially indoors. So we'll share as their progress continues, but their product is always fantastic. And then OHS had their annual photo contest and food drive. So this is really something else too. And if you'd like to enter into this contest, that's an opportunity to celebrate culture, heritage, and traditions and stories through photography. There's just one more day to enter because the deadline is tomorrow, December 10th. So to enter, you select a category and send your photos, JPEGs only please, to Mr. Derrick. At mjd@oregonsd.org, and then multiple entries are accepted. And then items for the food drive, this is part of it. When you come in to see the exhibit, they're also collecting items for the food pantry. So categories, they have Wisconsin back roads and backyards, Wild About Wisconsin, which is really any wildlife, the trophy shot, which is for hunters to respectfully showcase their special trophy, the trail shot, Martha Stewart still life, a still life that symbolizes the season, and an Orange Crush selfie. Sport your orange clothing and take a selfie. Okay. And then that's always a really fun show to go in and to see all of the entries and see all of the photographers bringing in their families to show off the entries. That's really cool. And then this is celebrating 125 years of Wisconsin State Parks. So once again, this is in Mr. Derrick's painting class at the high school. And these are things that are going to be on display at the Wisconsin State Capitol this December. This is a part of an invitation from Governor Evers to design handmade ornaments. So thanks to everybody who participated, and it'll be fun to see your work. This is a really cool thing too. This is a youth apprenticeship spotlight. So did you know that our students have the opportunity to gain valuable skills and get a preview of potential career opportunities? It's just one of many options. And today's spotlight is on Bryn. Bryn is an OHS senior who's currently working, get this, as a surgical pathology specimen control and receiving technician at UW Health. Bryn is exploring the healthcare career pathway through our OHS Youth Apprenticeship Program. Courses that have led up to this capstone experience, and this is important, you need to plan to have these experiences. Biology, chemistry, biotechnology, at Promega Biotechnology summer camps, and basic lab skills at MATC, and phlebotomy at MATC. This doesn't mean that every student has to have all of those experiences. Those are just experiences that prepare you for this type of apprenticeship. So if you or your student is currently a sophomore or a junior, now is a great time to start thinking about these options because class registration is actually coming up pretty soon. So students are encouraged to contact their school counselor and Ms. D'Amelio, our school to career coordinator. And this is just a fun little story. We had a special visitor at the high school. He traveled all the way from Kansas to visit the high school because this is where his father, Robert E. Lewis, was a teacher in the 70s. And during the visit, Mr. Lewis toured the school, shared memories of his father's time there, and he ran into Miss Byarski, who was a teacher at the same time as his father. So here's an excerpt from Mr. Lewis's thank you note to Mr. Pliner. I wanted to get in touch with you to express my gratitude for you taking the time out of your day to visit with me about my father and giving me a tour of the school. Of course, the highlight of the tour for me was being able to see my dad's old classroom, which was a business education classroom because those used to be the science classrooms. Believe it or not, this was not the first time that I had been in that room. I also can't thank you enough for introducing me to Miss B, and hearing her memories of Dad was very enjoyable, especially the part about how early he would arrive to complete classwork. She said he came in at like 5:30 in the morning to get things done. She remembered that. And that is exactly in line with my recollection of him from that time period. So that was a really cool community connection. And speaking of community, the Splash Pad is in its final month of fundraising, and we have some really fun and exciting news to share. You may have seen it already on Facebook today. So the Oregon Brooklyn Optimists have been raising funds for the Splash Pad for quite some time now. But the Splash Pad is going to be located next to the Oregon Community Pool, which is OSD property. So recently, we became aware that there was a $350,000 grant, this is so exciting, awarded for the Splash Pad project, which means we are on our way to make this happen. We only have about $150,000 to go. And in that effort to push it to the finish line, one community bank graciously offered to donate $50,000 in a matching donation format. So if you want to get involved and make a donation, it's OregonSplashPad.com. The deadline for raising funds is January 1st, and we're really hoping that construction begins this summer. And we're really grateful for the hard work of the Optimists. They have led the charge on this now, and the whole community will benefit from the work that they're doing and from the generosity of Oregon Community Bank, which is helping to make this happen. And then we encourage you to tune into the podcast. Our latest one had WKOW Senior Chief Meteorologist Bob Lindmeyer talking about how challenging it is to predict what the weather's going to be like this winter. So it was very nice to visit with him, and we appreciated his time.
Wow, that was a lot, as usual. A lot of great things going on in our school community. All right, that takes us to closing. Let's go to checkout. We'll start with you, Mary. Anything?
Nothing for me tonight, thank you.
All right, Heather.
Yep, I just wanted to give a shout out to Miss Eilenfeld at Forest Edge. I had the opportunity to volunteer in the classroom, and I wasn't sure exactly what I was getting into, but it was their filter factory day, and this was the day where the 6th grade classes came in and had various tools, paper towels, toothpicks, cotton balls, rubber bands, and they had to not only figure out how they wanted to make muddy water and filter it to clear water, but they had to figure out they only had 20 punches around a piece of paper to buy certain supplies, so they had to be very strategic about what supplies they could use. And it not only was it just a ton of work for Ms. Eilenfeld to put together, but also it was amazing to see the students work together and the creativity and, trial and error of like, did 2 layers of paper towel work or no? But if you put some cotton balls and, other things in there, and just so cool to see learning come to life. So wanted to give a shout out to the 6th grade, to Miss Eilenfeld.
Excellent engineering exercise there. Leslie? Caleb? Anna? All right, so we are going to move into executive session, so we'll take a 5-minute break and see you in the other room.